The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval base as Commander Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her black sedan. Her crisp uniform bore the insignia of her hard-earned rank, each ribbon and medal telling a story of dedication, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to her country. At 35, she had climbed the ranks faster than most, breaking barriers and shattering glass ceilings in a world dominated by men. Sarah had always known that her journey would be different. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, she was the daughter of a mechanic and a school teacher. Her parents had instilled in her the values of hard work and perseverance, but they never imagined their little girl would one day command respect in the most elite circles of the military. Sarah's path to leadership began in college, where she excelled in engineering and leadership studies. Her professors often remarked on her analytical mind and her ability to remain calm under pressure. After graduation, Sarah had faced a choice that would define her life. She could have easily landed a comfortable job in the private sector, but something deeper called to her. The events of her childhood had shaped her desire to serve something greater than herself. When she was 12, her older brother had died in a car accident, and she had watched her family struggle to find meaning in their loss. It was during those dark months that Sarah discovered her inner strength and her desire to protect others from experiencing similar pain. The military became her calling, but it was never easy. From day one at the Naval Academy, Sarah faced skepticism from her peers and instructors. Some questioned whether a woman could handle the physical demands of military service, while others doubted her mental toughness. But Sarah had something that couldn't be taught in any classroom or training facility: an unbreakable spirit and a refusal to accept limitations placed on her by others. During her early years in the Navy, Sarah threw herself into every challenge with fierce determination. She volunteered for the most difficult assignments, studied harder than her peers, and pushed herself to physical and mental limits that surprised even her instructors. Her first deployment took her to the Middle East, where she served as a communications officer aboard a destroyer. It was there that she first experienced combat, and where she proved to herself and others that she belonged. The ship came under attack during a routine patrol, and Sarah found herself coordinating rescue operations while under fire. For 6 hours, she maintained communication between scattered units, all while helping to treat wounded sailors in the medical bay. Her actions that day saved countless lives and earned her a commendation for bravery. But, more importantly, it solidified her belief that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Years passed, and Sarah continued to excel in every position she held. She became known for her innovative thinking and her ability to solve complex problems that others couldn't crack. Her superiors began to take notice, and she was selected for increasingly important roles. Each promotion brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to prove herself. The turning point in Sarah's career came when she was selected for a special operations planning role. It was a position that had never been held by a woman, and the appointment caused ripples throughout the military community. Some celebrated the historic nature of her selection, while others questioned whether she was truly qualified or if her promotion was merely a political statement. Sarah knew that every eye would be on her, waiting for her to make a mistake. The pressure was immense, but she had learned long ago how to channel pressure into performance. She spent months preparing for her new role, studying every aspect of special operations, learning from the best minds in the military, and developing strategies that would later be adopted throughout the armed forces. Her work in special operations planning was nothing short of revolutionary. Sarah developed new approaches to mission planning that reduced risk while increasing effectiveness. Her strategies were tested in real-world scenarios and proved successful time and time again. She worked closely with Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and other elite units, earning their respect through her competence and dedication. But respect didn't come easily. Many of the special operations personnel she worked with had never taken orders from a woman, and some struggled to accept her authority. Sarah faced this resistance with patience and professionalism, understanding that change takes time and that her actions would speak louder than any words. One particular incident early in her special operations career had tested her resolve. During a planning session for a high-stakes rescue mission, a veteran SEAL had questioned her qualifications in front of the entire team. The room had fallen silent as he suggested that her strategies were too conservative and that she didn't understand the realities of combat. Sarah had remained calm, presenting detailed analysis and historical precedent to support her recommendations. When the mission succeeded exactly as she had planned, with 0 casualties and complete objective achievement, the SEAL had privately apologized and became one of her strongest supporters. As Sarah walked across the base that morning, she reflected on how far she had come. Her reputation had grown beyond the Navy, and she was now recognized as one of the military's most innovative tactical minds. She had been invited to speak at military academies, had consulted on defense policy, and had earned the respect of generals and admirals across all branches of service. But success hadn't come without personal sacrifices. Sarah's dedication to her career had cost her relationships and had distanced her from family and friends who couldn't understand her drive. She had turned down numerous opportunities in the private sector that would have made her wealthy, choosing instead to continue serving her country. There had been moments of doubt, times when she wondered if the constant struggle was worth it, but she had never wavered in her commitment. The base was coming alive as Sarah made her way to the briefing room where she would be meeting with various Special Forces leaders. Today's meeting was particularly important, as it would determine the strategy for an upcoming joint operation that had been months in the planning. Multiple units would be involved, including Navy SEALs, and Sarah would be presenting the operational framework that she had spent weeks perfecting. As she entered the building, Sarah's mind was focused on the presentation ahead. She had rehearsed every detail, anticipated every possible question, and prepared contingency plans for multiple scenarios. This was the kind of challenge that energized her, the opportunity to lead and to make a real difference in the success of a mission that would protect American lives and interests abroad. The briefing room was already filling with personnel when Sarah arrived. She recognized many faces from previous operations and collaborations. These were some of the most elite warriors in the world, men and women who had dedicated their lives to protecting freedom and fighting for justice. Sarah felt honored to work alongside them, even as she knew that some still questioned her place in their ranks. She set up her presentation materials with practiced efficiency, double-checking that every chart and diagram was perfectly positioned. Sarah had learned early in her career that attention to detail wasn't just important, it was essential. In the world of military operations, small oversights could have catastrophic consequences. As more personnel filed into the room, Sarah noticed the subtle dynamics at play. There were the quiet conversations between longtime colleagues, the respectful nods between officers of different ranks, and the careful positioning that reflected both hierarchy and personal relationships. She had become skilled at reading these social currents, understanding that successful leadership required more than just technical competence. Among those entering the room was Petty Officer First Class Jake Morrison, a Navy SEAL with 15 years of service and a reputation for being both highly skilled and somewhat abrasive. Sarah had heard about Morrison through various channels. He was known as an exceptional operator but also as someone who didn't hesitate to voice his opinions, regardless of rank or protocol. She had never worked directly with him, but his reputation preceded him. Morrison was accompanied by several other SEALs, all of whom carried themselves with the quiet confidence that came from years of dangerous missions and successful operations. They were men who had proven themselves in the most challenging circumstances imaginable, and their presence in the room added gravity to the upcoming briefing. Sarah finished her preparations and took her position at the front of the room. She surveyed the assembled group, noting the mix of ranks, specialties, and experience levels. This diversity was both a strength and a challenge. She would need to present information that was detailed enough for the experts while remaining accessible to those who might be less familiar with certain aspects of the operation. The room gradually quieted as the start time approached. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded important presentations, but she had learned to harness that energy and use it to enhance her performance. She thought briefly of her younger self, the girl from Ohio who had dreamed of making a difference in the world. That girl could never have imagined standing where Sarah stood now, but she would have been proud of the woman she had become. As Sarah prepared to begin her presentation, she was unaware that the next few minutes would test not only her professional competence but also her personal resolve. The room held individuals who respected her achievements and others who remained skeptical of her capabilities. Among them was Morrison, whose opinions about women in leadership roles were about to collide with Sarah's reality in a way that would change both of their lives forever. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force everyone present to examine their assumptions about leadership, respect, and what it truly meant to serve with honor. Sarah's journey had brought her to this moment, and she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead with the same courage and determination that had defined her entire career. The briefing room fell silent as Commander Sarah Mitchell stepped forward to begin her presentation. The weight of expectation hung heavy in the air, and she could feel the scrutiny of every person present. She had faced similar situations countless times before, but this particular briefing felt different somehow, as if the stakes were higher than usual. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah began, her voice clear and confident. "Today we'll be reviewing the operational framework for Operation Lighthouse, a joint mission that will require unprecedented coordination between multiple Special Forces units." She clicked to her first slide, which displayed a detailed map of the target region. Sarah had spent weeks perfecting this presentation, analyzing every possible scenario and developing contingency plans for situations that others might not even consider. Her approach to military planning was methodical and thorough, qualities that had served her well throughout her career. She understood that in the world of special operations, there was no room for error, and every detail mattered. As she began explaining the mission parameters, Sarah could see the engaged faces of most attendees. These were professionals who understood the complexity of what they were discussing, and they appreciated the level of preparation that had gone into the briefing. Charts and graphs illuminated various aspects of the operation, from timing and logistics to risk assessment and emergency protocols. "The primary objective," Sarah continued, "is the extraction of 3 high-value intelligence assets from a hostile territory. The secondary objective involves the retrieval of classified materials that could compromise ongoing operations if they fall into enemy hands." She moved to the next slide, which showed a detailed timeline of the proposed operation. The mission she was describing was indeed complex, requiring split-second timing and flawless coordination between ground forces, air support, and naval assets. Sarah had factored in weather patterns, enemy patrol schedules, and dozens of other variables that could affect the operation's success. Her planning took into account not just the primary mission, but also multiple escape routes and contingency plans for various scenarios. About 20 minutes into the presentation, Sarah noticed some restlessness in the back of the room where Morrison and his fellow SEALs were sitting. She could see whispered conversations and subtle body language that suggested disagreement or skepticism. This wasn't unusual during complex briefings, and she was prepared to address questions and concerns as they arose. "The insertion will take place at 0230 hours, Sarah explained, pointing to a specific location on the tactical map. "SEAL Team 6 will approach from the northeast, while Army Rangers establish a perimeter to the south. Air support will maintain a holding pattern approximately 15 miles away, ready to provide assistance if needed." It was at this moment that Morrison's voice cut through the professional atmosphere of the briefing room. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, the word ma'am dripping with barely concealed sarcasm. "But, I have to ask, how exactly did you come up with these insertion points?" Sarah paused, recognizing the challenge in Morrison's tone. She had dealt with similar situations before, and she knew the importance of maintaining composure while addressing legitimate concerns. The insertion points were selected based on intelligence gathering over the past 6 weeks, satellite imagery analysis, and consultation with regional experts, she replied calmly. Morrison wasn't satisfied with this response. He stood up, his imposing frame commanding attention from everyone in the room. At 6 feet 3 inches tall and built like the elite warrior he was, Morrison had a presence that could intimidate even seasoned military personnel. His arms were crossed, and his expression made it clear that he wasn't impressed with what he was hearing. "With all due respect, Commander," Morrison said, emphasizing her rank in a way that somehow made it sound like an insult, "have you ever actually been in a combat zone? Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like textbook planning from someone who's never had to dodge bullets or worry about whether their intel is 24 hours old or 24 days old." The room went dead silent. Every person present understood that they were witnessing something significant, not just a disagreement about tactical planning, but a fundamental challenge to Sarah's authority and competence. Some officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others watched with interest to see how the situation would unfold. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but her voice remained steady. "Petty Officer Morrison, I understand you have concerns about the operation. If you have specific questions about any aspect of the planning, I'm happy to address them." She maintained eye contact with him, refusing to be intimidated despite the obvious hostility in his demeanor. But Morrison wasn't finished. In fact, he seemed emboldened by what he perceived as weakness in her diplomatic response. "Questions? Yeah, I've got questions. Like how someone who's spent their career behind a desk thinks they can plan operations for people who actually do the fighting. Do you even know what it feels like to have enemy fire coming at you? Have you ever had to make a life or death decision with incomplete information and no time to consult your charts and graphs?" The personal nature of Morrison's attack was obvious to everyone in the room. This wasn't about tactical disagreements or operational concerns. this was about his fundamental belief that Sarah didn't belong in her position. His words carried the weight of years of resentment and resistance to the changing dynamics within the military. Sarah could feel the tension in the room escalating. She was acutely aware that how she handled this moment would be talked about and analyzed for months to come. Some of the officers present would use this incident to judge her fitness for command, while others would see it as a test of her character and resilience. Petty Officer Morrison, Sarah said, her voice taking on a firmer tone, my combat experience includes 2 deployments to Afghanistan and 1 to Iraq. I've been under fire, I've made decisions that saved lives, and I've earned my position through demonstrated competence and leadership. If you have specific tactical concerns about this operation, I'm willing to discuss them. If your objections are based on something else entirely, then we need to address that separately. Morrison laughed, a harsh sound that seemed to fill the entire room. Demonstrated competence? You mean you've demonstrated that you can check the right boxes and navigate the political landscape? That's not the same thing as understanding what it takes to complete a mission when everything goes wrong, which it always does. He began walking toward the front of the room, his movement deliberate and threatening. Let me tell you something, Commander, he continued, making air quotes around her rank. I've been doing this for 15 years. I've completed over 200 missions, many of them in situations that would make most people curl up in a corner and cry for their mothers. I've pulled wounded teammates out of hostile territory, I've eliminated high-value targets under impossible circumstances, and I've never, not once, failed to complete an assigned mission. Morrison stopped about 3 feet away from Sarah, close enough that his imposing presence was clearly intended to intimidate. So when someone who's never been in my boots tries to tell me how to do my job, it makes me wonder what kind of military we're becoming. Are we more concerned with political correctness than we are with mission success? Are we promoting people based on their gender instead of their qualifications? The implications of Morrison's words were clear to everyone present. He wasn't just questioning Sarah's tactical decisions, he was questioning whether she deserved to be in her position at all. His comments touched on broader debates within the military about integration, advancement, and what qualifications should matter most in leadership positions. Sarah could feel her anger rising, but she had learned long ago to channel such emotions into focused determination rather than reactive responses. She knew that this moment was about more than just her own reputation, it was about the future of women in military leadership and the message that would be sent to everyone watching. Petty Officer Morrison, she said, stepping forward rather than backing away from his intimidating presence, your service record speaks for itself, and no one in this room questions your expertise or your dedication. But your experience doesn't give you the right to question the qualifications of superior officers based on assumptions and prejudices. Morrison's face darkened at this direct challenge to his behavior. Assumptions? Lady, the only assumption I'm making is that someone who's never been where I've been shouldn't be making decisions about where I'm going. And, frankly, the fact that you think your rank protects you from legitimate criticism shows exactly why you don't belong here. The word lady hung in the air like a slap. Every person in the room understood that Morrison had crossed a line from professional disagreement into personal disrespect and insubordination. Some officers looked appalled at his behavior, while others seemed uncertain about how to respond. Sarah felt a moment of doubt creep into her mind. She thought about all the times throughout her career when she had faced similar challenges, all the moments when people had questioned her right to be where she was. For just an instant, she wondered if Morrison might be right, if all her training and preparation could truly match the experience of someone who had been in combat as frequently as he had. But that moment of doubt was quickly replaced by a surge of determination. She thought about all the young women who might be watching this interaction, all the future leaders who needed to see that competence and character mattered more than gender or physical intimidation. She thought about her own journey and all the barriers she had overcome to reach this point. Petty Officer Morrison, Sarah said, her voice now carrying the full authority of her rank and position, you are out of line. Your comments are inappropriate, unprofessional, and border on insubordination. If you have tactical concerns about this operation, you can express them through proper channels. If your problem is with my gender or my right to hold this position, then that's a personal issue that has no place in this briefing room. Morrison's jaw tightened, and, for a moment it seemed like he might escalate the confrontation even further. The room held its collective breath, waiting to see how far this confrontation would go. Several officers appeared ready to intervene if the situation became physical, while others seemed to be enjoying the drama unfolding before them. But, instead of backing down, Morrison decided to make his final, most devastating attack. He looked directly at Sarah, his expression filled with contempt, and said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "The problem isn't with your gender, Commander. The problem is that you're wearing a rank you haven't earned and making decisions about operations you don't understand. You can hide behind regulations and political correctness all you want, but everyone in this room knows the truth. You're here because of what you are, not because of what you can do." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. In that moment, all her achievements, all her sacrifices, all her years of dedication seemed to be reduced to nothing more than tokenism. Morrison had voiced the doubt that haunted many women in leadership positions, the suspicion that their success was due to their gender rather than their qualifications. The room erupted in murmurs and, shifting as people reacted to Morrison's inflammatory statement. Some officers looked shocked at his audacity, while others seemed to be considering whether there might be truth in his words. The professional atmosphere of the briefing had been completely shattered, replaced by tension and uncertainty about what would happen next. The silence that followed Morrison's devastating words felt eternal. Commander Sarah Mitchell stood at the front of the briefing room, feeling as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. For a moment, she was no longer a decorated officer with years of distinguished service, she was simply a woman whose right to exist in this space had been publicly questioned in the most humiliating way possible. Sarah's mind raced through a dozen different responses. Part of her wanted to match Morrison's aggression with her own, to remind him of her achievements and tear apart his assumptions piece by piece. Another part of her wanted to walk away with dignity and tact, to refuse to engage with someone who clearly had no intention of treating her with respect. But a deeper part of her knew that this moment was bigger than just her own reputation or feelings. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, Sarah straightened her shoulders and looked directly at Morrison. When she spoke, her voice was calm but carried an unmistakable edge of steel. "Petty Officer Morrison, you've made your position very clear. You believe that I haven't earned my rank and that I'm not qualified to plan operations involving your unit. Is that an accurate summary of your concerns?" Morrison, perhaps sensing that he had pushed too far but unwilling to back down, nodded curtly. "That's exactly right, ma'am. I think this entire briefing is a waste of time because it's being led by someone who doesn't understand the realities of special operations." Sarah nodded slowly, as if considering his words carefully. "I see. And your assessment is based on your belief that I lack combat experience and tactical understanding. Is that correct?" "Among other things, yes," Morrison replied, his confidence seeming to grow with each exchange. What happened next surprised everyone in the room, including Morrison himself. Instead of defending her qualifications or attacking his insubordination, Sarah did something completely unexpected. She walked over to the classified folder on the briefing table and extracted a thick file marked with multiple security classifications. "I think it's time for some context," Sarah said, opening the file and placing several documents on the projector. The first document that appeared on the screen was a mission report dated 3 years earlier, marked with the highest levels of classification. Operation Desert Phoenix, March 2022. Perhaps some of you remember this mission. A murmur went through the room. Several of the Special Operations personnel present clearly recognized the operation name, and their expressions suggested it had been significant. Morrison's confident expression began to waver slightly as he tried to understand where Sarah was going with this. "For those unfamiliar with Desert Phoenix," Sarah continued, "it involved the rescue of 4 American contractors who had been captured by a terrorist organization in Syria. Intelligence indicated they had less than 48 hours to live. The mission required insertion into hostile territory with no support infrastructure and extraction under heavy enemy fire." Sarah clicked to the next slide, which showed a tactical map covered with movement patterns and defensive positions. The original mission plan, developed by Central Command, called for a direct assault on the compound where the hostages were being held. The estimated casualty rate for our forces was 35%, with only a 60% chance of successfully retrieving the hostages alive. Morrison was now paying attention in a way he hadn't been before. His posture had shifted from aggressive confidence to wary interest, as if he sensed that something significant was about to be revealed. "The mission plan was rejected by the officer in charge of operational planning," Sarah continued, who instead proposed an alternative approach. This alternative plan reduced the estimated casualty rate to 8% while increasing the probability of hostage survival to 85%. She clicked to the next slide, which showed a completely different tactical approach. Instead of a direct assault, the plan called for a sophisticated deception operation that would draw enemy forces away from the compound while a small team infiltrated from an unexpected direction.
The planning officer's approach was unconventional, Sarah explained.
It relied on psychological warfare, misdirection, and precise timing rather than overwhelming force. Many senior officers questioned whether such a complex plan could be executed successfully under combat conditions. Sarah paused for a moment, letting the tension build in the room. She could see that several officers were beginning to understand where this was heading, but Morrison still looked confused and increasingly uncomfortable. The mission was approved, Sarah continued, and executed exactly as planned.
All 4 hostages were recovered alive and uninjured.
0 casualties among our forces.
The enemy never understood what had happened to them.
She clicked to the final slide, which showed the official mission summary and commendation letters. The planning officer who developed this alternative approach, Sarah said, looking directly at Morrison, was Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell.
That would be me. The impact of this revelation was immediate and profound.
Morrison's face went pale as he realized what Sarah had just revealed. Not only did she have extensive combat experience, but she had planned and executed one of the most successful special operations missions in recent military history. But Sarah wasn't finished. She returned to her classified folder and extracted another set of documents.
Operation Steel Thunder, January 2023.
The elimination of a high-value terrorist target who had been responsible for multiple attacks on American forces. The target was located in a heavily fortified compound in a densely populated urban area. Morrison was now visibly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot as Sarah continued her methodical presentation of her background.
Other officers in the room were leaning forward, clearly fascinated by these revelations about their colleagues' service record.
The original plan, Sarah continued, called for a drone strike that would have eliminated the target but also killed an estimated 47 civilians, including women and children.
This plan was deemed unacceptable from both tactical and political standpoints.
She displayed another tactical map, this one showing an intricate plan involving multiple moving parts and split-second timing. An alternative approach was proposed that would allow for precision elimination of the target with 0 civilian casualties. The plan required coordination between 6 different military units and relied on intelligence gathering that had never been attempted before.
Sarah looked around the room, noting the rapt attention of everyone present.
Even Morrison seemed unable to look away, despite his obvious discomfort with the direction the briefing had taken.
The mission was successful, Sarah announced.
The target was eliminated, no civilians were harmed, and the operation was completed without any of our forces being detected or engaged by enemy combatants.
The planning officer for this mission was also Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell.
The silence in the room was now of a completely different character than it had been minutes earlier. Instead of tension and conflict, there was a sense of awe and respect for what they were hearing. Several officers were looking at Sarah with new appreciation for her capabilities and experience. Morrison, meanwhile, looked as though he wanted to disappear through the floor. His earlier confidence had evaporated completely, replaced by the dawning realization that he had massively misjudged the woman he had been so eager to dismiss. But Sarah still wasn't finished with her presentation. She extracted a final set of documents from her folder, these bearing even higher security classifications than the previous ones.
Operation Silent Thunder, 6 months ago.
The recovery of classified nuclear technology that had been stolen by a foreign intelligence service.
Morrison's eyes widened.
He was clearly familiar with this operation, though he obviously hadn't known who had planned it. The success of Silent Thunder had been discussed throughout the special operations community, with many considering it a masterpiece of tactical planning and execution. This mission required the coordination of Navy SEALs, Army Special Forces, Air Force Special Operations, and CIA operatives, Sarah explained. The target was located in a facility with more security than most military bases. Intelligence suggested that the facility was protected by over 200 enemy combatants with advanced weapons and surveillance systems. She displayed a tactical diagram that was so complex it looked more like an engineering blueprint than a military operation plan. The successful completion of this mission required innovations in planning methodology that had never been attempted before. It involved deception operations, electronic warfare, psychological manipulation, and precision timing that allowed for multiple simultaneous actions across a geographic area spanning 50 square miles. Sarah paused again, letting the magnitude of what she was describing sink in. The mission was completed in under 4 hours.
All objectives were achieved, all personnel returned safely, and the stolen technology was recovered intact. The enemy never understood how their facility had been penetrated or how the technology had been removed. Morrison was now staring at Sarah with something approaching disbelief. The operation she was describing was legendary within military circles, discussed in advanced tactical courses and studied by special operations planners around the world. The chief planning officer for Operation Silent Thunder, Sarah said, her voice carrying quiet authority, was Commander Sarah Mitchell. The success of this mission resulted in a personal commendation from the Secretary of Defense and recognition from the President of the United States. The transformation in the room was complete. Officers who had been watching the confrontation with casual interest were now looking at Sarah with genuine respect and admiration. Morrison, meanwhile, appeared to be struggling with the realization that he had just publicly humiliated himself by attacking someone whose credentials far exceeded his own. Sarah closed the classified folder and returned to her position at the front of the room. When she spoke again, her voice was calm but carried unmistakable authority. Petty Officer Morrison, you questioned my combat experience and my understanding of special operations. You suggested that I had been promoted based on political considerations rather than merit. You implied that I was not qualified to plan operations involving your unit. Morrison said nothing, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger at his own miscalculation. I want to be very clear about something, Sarah continued. I don't share details of my service record to intimidate anyone or to prove my worth. My qualifications speak for themselves, and I don't need validation from subordinates who question my authority based on their own prejudices and assumptions. The rebuke was delivered with surgical precision, cutting to the heart of Morrison's behavior without raising her voice or resorting to personal attacks. Everyone in the room understood that they had just witnessed a masterclass in leadership and professional conduct. However, Sarah said, her tone becoming slightly warmer, I also understand that trust and respect must be earned, especially in the special operations community. If anyone in this room has legitimate questions about the operational plan we're discussing today, I encourage you to voice them. Professional discourse and tactical debate are essential to mission success. She looked directly at Morrison as she delivered her final words on the subject. What I will not tolerate is disrespect, insubordination, or attacks on my character based on assumptions and prejudice. We are all here to serve our country and protect our fellow service members. That shared mission is more important than any personal differences or preconceived notions we might have. The message was clear to everyone present. Sarah had not only defended herself against Morrison's attacks but had done so in a way that demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and professionalism that had earned her position. She had turned a moment of confrontation into a teaching opportunity, showing rather than telling why she belonged in her role. Morrison stood in silence, clearly struggling with how to respond. His earlier bravado had been completely deflated by the revelation of Sarah's service record, and he was now faced with the uncomfortable reality that he had badly misjudged the situation. The other SEALs in his unit were looking at him with expressions that ranged from disappointment to embarrassment, clearly unhappy with how he had represented them. The rest of the room waited to see what would happen next, understanding that this moment would likely be remembered and discussed for years to come. Sarah had proven her qualifications beyond any doubt, but the question remained whether Morrison would have the character to acknowledge his mistake and move forward professionally. The stage was set for what would either be a moment of redemption or a further display of stubborn pride that would damage Morrison's own reputation and career prospects. Either way, Sarah had established her authority and competence in a manner that no one present would ever forget. The tension in the briefing room hung thick as Commander Sarah Mitchell stood waiting for Petty Officer Morrison's response. The revelation of her extraordinary service record had completely shifted the dynamics of the situation, but the confrontation was far from over. Morrison stood frozen, his face cycling through emotions ranging from shock to anger to what might have been the beginning of shame. For several long moments, no one spoke. The other special operations personnel in the room were clearly uncomfortable with the situation their colleague had created. Some were avoiding eye contact with Morrison entirely, while others looked as though they wanted to distance themselves from his behavior. The SEALs who had entered with Morrison appeared particularly upset, understanding that his actions were reflecting poorly on their entire unit. Finally, Morrison spoke, his voice noticeably quieter than it had been during his earlier outburst. I wasn't aware of your service record, Commander. The word seemed forced, as though admitting ignorance was physically painful for him.
Sarah nodded calmly, recognizing that this might be the closest thing to an apology she would receive. Service records are classified for good reasons, Petty Officer Morrison. I don't expect everyone to be familiar with operations they weren't involved in. But Morrison wasn't ready to let the matter drop completely. Perhaps unable to fully accept that he had been so completely wrong, he attempted one final challenge. Those operations you mentioned, they were planning exercises. Being behind a desk and developing strategies is different from being on the ground when those plans fall apart. The comment revealed that Morrison still didn't fully understand what Sarah had just told him. Several officers in the room shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that Morrison was only digging himself deeper into a hole that was already embarrassingly deep. Sarah's expression remained patient, but there was steel in her voice when she responded. Petty Officer Morrison, I wasn't just the planning officer for those missions. I was on the ground for every single one of them. The statement hit the room like a thunderbolt. Even officers who had been following the conversation closely were surprised by this revelation. It was extremely unusual for high-level planning officers to participate directly in the operations they designed, particularly missions as dangerous as the one Sarah had described. Operation Desert Phoenix, Sarah continued, her voice steady and matter-of-fact.